Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our weekly Parsha Shiur. This week's Parsha is Parsha's Toldot, and we will get right to it. There's a beautiful Hasidic story that's told about a gartel. A gartel, of course, is that black belt that it is the custom of many to wear, specifically when they daven, many of them when they study Torah. They wear that gartel, that additional extra belt around their waist. And of course, as with all things Jewish and all things religious, you have so many different customs of how to tie the gartel and how to wind it and how to put it around your waist. And there are some who have the custom that they crisscross the gartel in front of them. So as they wind it around to the front, they crisscross it, creating, a sort of a loop in the gartel right in front of them, and continue winding it the other way. And the legend has it that in one particular Hasidic group, it was not the custom to twist the gartel. And in the other Hasidic group, it was the custom to twist the gartel. And so two Rebbes or two Hasidim are talking to each other. And one is explaining to the other, extolling the spiritual virtues in Badafka wearing the gartel this way, Badafka winding the belt this way, where you take the two ends and you crisscross them and you create this knot or this loop in front, and how it represents all sorts of spiritual concepts. And he challenges his other chassid and he says, come on, why don't you put on the gartel this way, the way we do? Why don't you adapt our customs? And also wind the gartel, the other way, crisscross the loops over each other. Favos dreiter nicht dem gartel. Why don't you turn the gartel that way? And the other fellow said to him in Yiddish, he said those beautiful words. He says, "Az me ken gein gleich, favos darf man gein krum." If you can go straight, why choose to go crooked? If you can do things in a straightforward way, if you can do things in a healthy way, why the need to unnecessarily complicate things and create twists and turns and loops and knots where they're not necessary? Your custom is to make the loop with pleasure. Ours is to gain gleich, to go straight. We feel no need to gain krum, to go crooked, where it isn't necessary to go that way. I say this to you because of the many discussions and of the many challenges that come up when we study this week's Parsha, Parsha's Toldot. It seems there is a scenario here where things could have gone straight, where things could have gone gleich, smooth and without issues. And for whatever reason, unnecessary complications are involved, and this needs to be explored and studied. So to begin, I'm going to jump right in. Begin in Perek Chof Zayin, chapter 27. I'm going to start with Pasuk Lamed Hey, verse 35. Chapter 27, verse 35. The story you all know. We'll set it up very quickly. The Torah says that Yitzchak, at the age of 123, realizes that he is within 5 years of the passing of his mother Sarah, who passed at the age of 127. And Yitzchak becomes concerned that he doesn't have much time left. In the end, Yitzchak lived many, many years and passed at the age of 180. But at the age of 123, he was concerned for his own future. And so he decides before he goes that he's going to bless his children. But Yitzchak has two children. The one who was born first is Esav. The one who was born second is Yaakov. And so he decides, he summons his older son, the one who was born first, Esav, and he says, listen, go out and bring me some food, bring me some wine, and I'm going to bless you before I die. Yitzchak's wife, Rivka, overhears her husband's instructions to their son Esav. Rivka decides that the blessings rightfully go to Yaakov and not to Esav. And so she summons her son Yaakov, and a very elaborate plan is put into place. In short, Esav's garments are given to Yaakov. Food which is prepared by Rivka is given to Yaakov. And Yaakov comes into his father Yitzchak's room wearing Esav's garments with the food that his father had requested. And he goes into Yitzchak and he presents himself as Esav. And he encourages his father to partake of the food, which Yaakov does. And he encourages his father Yitzchak to bless him, which Yitzchak actually does. And Yitzchak gives Yaakov the brachas, the blessings, which were intended to go for Esav. Not before Yitzchak questions Yaakov over and over again. Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? And Yaakov insists, Anoichi Esav b'chayrecha, I am Esav, your firstborn son. Yitzchak says those famous words. Yitzchak says, Akol kol Yaakov v'hayodayim midei Esav. He says, you have the voice, you sound like Yaakov, but your hands feel like Esav. Yitzchak is feeling Yaakov's hands because he seems to be having a hard time believing that this is in fact Esav. So he says, it's the voice is the voice of Yaakov, but the hands are the hands of Esav. In the end, it seems, at least this is the superficial reading of the verses, in the end, it seems that Yitzchak is convinced that this is in fact Esav, and he blesses him. No sooner does Yitzchak give the brachas to his son Yaakov, thinking that he is Esav, and the real Esav arrives. The Esav Achiv Ba Mitzaydo, Esav, the real Esav arrives. And he had also prepared food. And he walks inside and he says, Father, get up, eat from the food that I've prepared for you and bless me. And Yaakov, Yitzchak, the Torah says, trembles. He realizes something's going on. He trembles and he says, what do you mean? Somebody was just here and he already took the blessings. And Esav, the real Esav, hears that something has happened and his brother has come. And Esav cries. He cries out in what the Torah describes as a great and bitter cry, ad ma'od, a tremendously great and bitter cry, and begs his father to bless him. Perek Chav Zayin Pasuk Lamed Hey, Vayomer. And Yitzchak says to his son Esav, Bo achicha b'mirma, your brother Yaakov has come. B'mirma, Rashi translates to mean b'chochma. Your brother has come with wisdom, with shrewdness. Vayikach birchasecha, and he's taken your blessing. Yitzchak contends. He says, your brother came with wisdom, with shrewdness, with trickery, with deceit perhaps, and taken your blessings. Vayomer, so Esav turns to his father Yaakov and says, Hachi kora shmo Yaakov. Is this the reason why you, Yitzchak, named him Yaakov when he was born? Vayakveni ze pamayim, he tricked me, he deceived me, he worked me over twice. Twice? What's twice? Es b'chayrosi lokach, he took my firstborn rights. V'hinei ata lokach b'rchosi, and now he's taken my blessing as well. Vayomer, and Esav insists, he says to his father, Halo yatzalta li bracha, you promised me you'd bless me. Ha-bracha achas yilecha, do you only have one blessing? And Esav insists, and in the end, Yaakov gives him a quasi bracha, which is difficult. The bracha that Yitzchak in the end does give Esav is difficult to understand. It's not for now. But in the end, Yitzchak does find some way of blessing him. Not too long after that, Esav buries the resentment against Yaakov, and the story goes from there. But here, on the word in Pasuk Lamed Vav, Achi kara shmo Yaakov, is this why you called him Yaakov? Because he's tricked me twice. There is a fascinating Rashi. Says Rashi, Esav asks his father, is this why you called him Yaakov? Al shem shu osid la'akveni, because he's going to trick me? And the Medrash says that Yitzchak, hearing this, is very reassured. He feels much better when he hears Esav's complaint. What was the problem? Yitzchak was sitting there, says the Medrash, worried over the fact that he had blessed his younger son, unbeknown to him, before his older son. Hischil Esav Mitzaik, Esav started crying and said, what do you mean? My brother tricked me twice. Amar lo Aviv, his father said to him, what do you mean he tricked you twice? What did he do? So Esav says, what do you mean, what did he do? He took my firstborn rights. He took my firstborn rights. This Esav is referring to a story that happens at the beginning of the Parsha. Esav comes from the field. He's hungry and is tired. Yaakov is cooking a lentil soup. And Esav says to him, please give me some soup. And Yaakov says, of course I'll give you some soup in exchange for the firstborn rights. And Esav says, what do I need it for anyways? And Esav sells his firstborn rights to his brother Yaakov for a pot of lentil soup. And Yaakov gives him bread and lentils, and they cut a deal. In fact, Yaakov makes Esav swear. Yaakov made Esav swear that he would sell him the birthright. And Esav does. So now that Esav has been deceived, has been tricked out of his blessings, Esav is complaining to his father. He says, maybe the reason why you called him Yaakov is because he's such a scammer. He scammed me twice. Yitzchak says, what do you mean twice? What's twice? Esav says, well, he took my firstborn. He took my firstborn rights. Yet Yitzchak says, wait a second. He took your firstborn rights? Tell me more. He says, well, I came home from the field one day and I was hungry and there was lentil soup and Yaakov gave me lentil soup in exchange for the firstborn rights. And Yitzchak says, Gam Baruch Yihye. That's his response. He says, Baruch Hashem. If that's the case, then I have nothing to fear. I have nothing to worry. I didn't do the wrong thing by blessing the younger son before the older son, because it turns out that the younger son bought the firstborn rights from the older son. And so Yitzchak feels better, as the Medrash says. Yitzchak feels better upon hearing about the exchange and the sale of the firstborn rights that Yaakov bought from Esav, because Yitzchak says, if that's the case, I did the right thing by giving the brachas to Yaakov rather than Esav, because he in fact had purchased the firstborn rights from his brother. End of Rashi. Okay. What Rashi seems to be saying, at least on a literal level, is that Yitzchak feels reassured after the whole story is over. Yitzchak is reassured by the fact that Yaakov and Esav had among themselves this deal where he sold the firstborn right to his brother for a pot of lentil soup. Because Yitzchak said, if that's the case, I did the right thing by blessing the younger son, although he is biologically younger. In reality, he purchased the firstborn rights from his biologically older brother, and so by right he deserves the blessing. And so Yitzchak is reassured over hearing this because he says, if that's the case, I did the right thing by blessing Yaakov rather than Esav. This is the simple understanding of what Rashi says. Kana ben Shoyel, my dear brothers and sisters, I want to ask you a very simple question. If Yaakov had purchased the firstborn rights from his brother Esav for a pot of lentil soup, and he had already made Esav swear that Esav was going to uphold his end of the deal and sell the firstborn for a pot of lentil soup, if it was sold, and if it was signed, and if it was sworn, then why does Yaakov need to pretend like he's Esav in order to get the brachas? Why does Yaakov have to get dressed up in Esav's garments and pretend like he's somebody else in order to get the blessings? And what really is the whole story? The whole story seems to not make any sense at all. If by right he deserves the blessing, because he's purchased the rights to them, because he's purchased the firstborn from a biologically older brother, who, yes, was born first, but apparently had no interest in the firstborn rights. If Yaakov was smart enough at an earlier stage in history, a couple of years back, to figure out that the firstborn rights are going to come to good use, if Yaakov understood this before Esav did, and legally and rightfully purchased the rights to the firstborn, then the whole story doesn't seem to be necessary. Then why the need for Yaakov to pretend like he's Esav in order to swindle the blessings for himself? Why the need for swindling at all? What's the need to swindle anything? Why couldn't Yaakov simply go to his father and say, my dear father, I deserve the blessings. Why do I deserve the blessings? Because I bought the rights to the firstborn from my brother. Esav sold them to me. He swore to it. He swore to it. It was a deal that we made. Why would Yitzchak have any difficulty with that? In the end, that's exactly what happens. In the end, Yitzchak finds out that actually he blessed the right son first, because Yaakov had purchased the rights to the firstborns and all those rights that come along with it, had purchased them legally from his older brother. No. So what in heaven's name is the problem here? Why the need to underline? Let's go back to that Yiddish expression. Was darf man gehen krumm, but man kann gehen gleich? Why should we go crooked if we can go straight? Why the need to deceive, to pull the wool over anybody's eyes? He should have gone to his father. Yaakov should have gone to his father and said, Tate, the firstborn rights are mine, I purchased them. All right, the Torah says that Yitzchak loved Esav. Okay, but yeah, Yitzchak is Esav. Yitzchak loved Esav, very nice. It's nice that Yitzchak loved Esav. We can discuss what that means. We can discuss the value of that. Everything fine and good. But the fact that Yitzchak loves Esav doesn't deny Yaakov to the rights that he purchased, fair and square. Does Esav not agree that this sale happened? Does Esav not agree that this sale is valid? So then you go for a din Torah. All right, does Yaakov claims he has the rights to the firstborn because he purchased them. Perhaps Esav felt that the sale was under coercion. All right. So you go for a court case, and then you decide who has the firstborn rights. And then if Yaakov loses and the firstborn rights still stay Esav's, then you figure out a way to get, then you cannot go straight, then you go crooked, then you steal the blessings. But why steal something that belongs to you? Why would Yaakov do that? In the notes here, somebody posted a question. Somebody's asking, what is Rivka's role in this? And that's another great question. Let's add this to the question we're already asking. Rivka is sitting there listening to the conversation behind closed doors that takes place between her husband and Esav. She doesn't like it. She wants the brachas to go to her son Yaakov because Rivka loves Yaakov. Yitzchak loves Esav, but Rivka loves Yaakov. So she wants Yaakov to get the blessing. So she calls Yaakov and she says, let's dress you up like Esav. Let's pretend that you're Esav. You'll take the food into your father and you'll get the bracha. This makes sense? Why the need to work the whole situation in such a bizarre format? Rivka should have called Yaakov and said, go into your father and tell him, by right, they're yours. You purchased them. And again, in the end, and the proof is in the pudding, in the end, when Yitzchak hears that Yaakov had in fact purchased the rights, the firstborn rights from his brother Esav, Yitzchak is relieved, Yitzchak is happy to hear that, and he concedes the fact that the brachas in fact did belong to Yaakov and not to Esav. He articulates this with the words, Gam Baruch Yiyeh. So the whole story seems unnecessarily complicated. Why should Yaakov pretend to be Esav, put on Esav's garments, have to seemingly lie to his father about who he is, pretend to be someone that he isn't, when all along, all he needed to do was say, I am Yaakov, I sound like Yaakov, I feel like Yaakov, I talk like Yaakov, but I deserve the brachas because I purchased them fair and square. Right? Imagine I come to your house in the middle of the night and I steal your car. You catch me on the security cameras and you lock me up in jail. Stealing a car. We come in front of the judge. The judge says, Kesselman, why'd you steal a car? I say, oh, Your Honor, actually, the car is mine. The car is yours. How's the car yours? And I produce documentation that I actually purchased the car. I actually purchased it. I paid for it. and the document is signed and sealed and legal and everything is fine, the judge would look at me and say, you in Gamsen Meshuggah. What are you doing? If the car is legally yours, why are you breaking into his house in the middle of the night, stealing his keys and driving off like a criminal? Why are you acting like a criminal if you didn't do anything wrong? Why are you stealing something that's rightfully yours? What's the seichel in that? It seems, I would dare say, it seems the most puzzling part of the whole story. The Torah goes to great length to present and to explain the story of how Yaakov purchases the rights to the firstborn from his brother. The soup that he made, short of telling us what the weather was like that day, the Torah spares no detail. What he bought it for, why Esav came back from the field. He was tired, he was hungry. All right, he had a busy Esav day, fine, Zolzain. Whatever it was. Yaakov had the soup ready. Yaakov was suspicious, so Yaakov made him swear. And the Torah says, Vayivez Esav es habchora. Esav didn't care. He saw no value in it. So he sold it to his brother for a pot of lentil soup. No. So the first, all right, we cannot change history. Right? Who was it? Somebody in Washington once said, you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. You're not entitled to your own facts. You can't change the fact. The fact is that Esav was biologically born first. Mazel tov, zolzai. But the rights that come along with it, the Torah says Esav saw no value in them. Lo mozel li b'choiro. That's what Esav said. And he sold it for a pot of lentil soup. And Yaakov purchased it and made him swear. No! So now the firstborn rights are Yaakov's. It seems like if someone would have just let Yitzchak know that this happened, the whole thing would have been unnecessary. We would have spared ourselves so much tzoros. And then Esav wouldn't be burying a murderous rage against Yaakov for years. And think about the repercussions of the story. For years to come, Yaakov is afraid for his life. Esav wants to kill him. Why does Esav want to kill him? Because he stole his blessings. He acted like an imposter and presented himself to their father like he was Esav. And the whole thing seems ridiculously unnecessary. Okay. Someone wrote in the comments, Esav sold his birthright under duress. Perhaps that makes the sale invalid. It's a good question. The validity of the sale is challenged for many reasons. I guess the question here is, even if the sale would have deemed to be invalid, then we can understand why Yaakov went and stole the blessings. But Yitzchak apparently doesn't see the sale as invalid. As soon as Yitzchak hears about it, he's very relieved. So in the end, Yitzchak is only too happy to find out that he did the right thing. Yitzchak didn't think it was an invalid sale. That's what Rashi is saying here. Yitzchak said, wonderful, great. Gam Baruch Yi. Yitzchak said, I was afraid that I had done the wrong thing by blessing the wrong person. But now that I hear that I blessed the right person, that's fantastic. Okay. I believe in order to answer this question, we need to take one giant step back. Let's address the larger picture here. Why did Yitzchak really want to give the blessings to his son Esav? Even assuming that he thought Esav was the older brother. Even if he assumed that Esav had the rights to being firstborn, fine. But why did Yitzchak want to bless his son Esav? Did Yitzchak not know who Esav was? Come on. Did Yitzchak not know who Esav was? Esav, according to the rabbis, was a murderer. Esav, according to the rabbis, was a rapist. Esav, according to the rabbis, was an idol worshiper. His wives were idol worshipers. How can a father not know who his son is? Come on. The Torah says Yitzchak loved Esav. Vayev Yitzchak es Esav, ki tzayid befiv. All right, there's different explanations of what that means. Esav brought him food. Esav was cunning with his words. Esav excelled in the mitzvah of kibud av. All things considered, wonderful. Okay. But can we really accept that Yitzchak didn't know who Esav was? That he didn't know what Esav did in his spare time? Seems difficult to understand. Seems difficult to accept. In fact, when you read the Psukim, it's impossible to accept. You see, what happens is, and I'll give you a couple of proofs. What happens is, Yaakov shows up with the food. Remember this part? Yaakov shows up with the food to his father. Yitzchak, the father, says to him, Maza miharto limtzoi b'ni. He says, how'd you get here so quickly? How'd you do this so fast? So Yaakov, pretending to be Esav, says, Ki hikra Hashem elakecha lefonai. Hashem made it happen. Yitzchak responds, he says, come here. Yitzchak says to Yaakov, come here. I need to feel you. Are you really Esav or not? Says Rashi, Yitzchak says to himself, Ein derech Esav liyeshem shamayim shogru b'fiv. Esav doesn't talk about God. I just asked my son how he got here so quickly, and he answered, Hashem helped me. He answered, Hashem made it happen. Yitzchak says to himself, something is strange. Esav doesn't talk that way. Come here, he says to his son. I need to feel you to see if you're really Esav or not. Why did Esav not speak about Hashem? Which Jew, when you ask them how they got here or how things went well, which Jew doesn't say, Hashem helped me, Baruch Hashem, right? Thank God, please God. Which Jew doesn't talk that way? Yitzchak hears the individual standing in front of him say Hashem's name. Yitzchak goes, we got a problem. I am not believing this. Esav doesn't, with all of Esav's trickery and with all of Esav's deceit, he didn't think to refer to Hashem often enough, so that when his brother walked in pretending that he's somebody else, Yitzchak's alarm bells go off. Yitzchak goes, oh wait, this doesn't sound right. Pay attention to the verses. How many times does Yitzchak ask him again and again and again, are you Esav? Are you Esav? Yitzchak doesn't believe it. The smell of Gan Eden walked in, that the rabbis tell us, as Yaakov comes in with the food for his father. Yitzchak goes, what's this? Esav doesn't smell this way. So Yitzchak obviously knew who his son Esav was, and yet he loved him. And yet he wanted to give him the brachas. Did Yitzchak not know who his son Yaakov was? Did Yitzchak not know that Yaakov was a Torah scholar? Did Yitzchak not know that Yaakov was a tzaddik? Did Yitzchak not know that Yaakov was an ish tom, was a sincere and a wholehearted person who would sit and study Torah all day? Did Yitzchak not know that his son Yaakov was the right person to father the Jewish people? What's Yitzchak's obsession with Esav? What does he want with Esav? A murderous, idol-worshipping, immoral, gruff human being? And Yitzchak keeps gravitating toward him. Why? What does he want with Esav? What do you want with a Rasha like that? Let him go. Let him be an Esav. He's a man of the field. He's a man of the field. Let him be a man of the field. Let him succeed in the arena of the field. There's some kind of, it seems like almost an unhealthy relationship here where Yitzchak he loves Esav, and Esav, has this kibud av where he honors his father, at least in his father's presence. And the Talmud tells us that Esav would ask his father cleverly crafted questions to make Yitzchak think that he was a pious Jew. He asked him how you tithe salt and different kinds of things, to make Yitzchak think that he was some kind of, holy roller. Was Yitzchak really fooled by that? Come on. He'd come in from the field after a day of murder and pillage and theft, bring his father food, treat his father respectfully, and what, and Yitzchak would buy it? And the young man who sits in yeshiva all day, studying Torah, trying to be a good Jew? Nah, the father goes, not interested in that. What's up with that? Vayehav Yitzchak es Esav, the Torah says, Yitzchak loved Esav. Why? What does this all mean? Okay, many explanations are given here. Here's one of them. So Yitzchak looks at his two sons, Yaakov and Esav. No two children are alike. No two children perhaps could be further apart than Yaakov and Esav. Yaakov is an ishtam. He's sincere, he's pious, he's wholehearted. He's not a man of the field. He's not a man of the world. A man of the book, perhaps, but not a man of the field. And Yitzchak sees Esav for everything he is. A murderer, an immorally depraved person. Yitzchak can see every man who doesn't properly recognize Hashem, deceitful, lying thief. But Yitzchak sees something in Esav that he likes. Yitzchak sees something in Esav that he wants to bless. Yitzchak sees a potential in Esav that he wants to nurture, that he wants to develop, that he wants to cultivate and bless. There's something about that Yitzchak is deeply in love with. And he keeps going back to it. What is it? What does Yitzchak see in Esav that is so attractive to Yitzchak that he wants to bless Esav? He wants to see him as the older one of the two. What is it? And the answer, of course, is that Esav is powerful. In Esav, Yitzchak, his father, sees a power unmatched. A force that he doesn't see in Yaakov. Yaakov is wonderful, Yaakov is holy. But there's a drive there. In Esav, there's a volcanic energy that Yitzchak sees in Esav, that Yitzchak is very attracted to. Of course, Yitzchak is keenly aware that Esav is using his energy and his power for all the wrong things. Of course, Yitzchak is not over bottle. Yitzchak is not out to lunch. Yitzchak can tell that this energy is being used in all the wrong ways. So what, says Yitzchak? So what? Don't be fooled by the exterior. Here's a man who has the fire. We can take that fire, says Yitzchak, the father who loves his son. We can channel it and we can do amazing things with it. Think about what we can do with this guy, Esav. That kind of drive, that kind of force, that kind of energy, that kind of aggression. Think what we can do, says Yitzchak to himself, if we take Esav and we harness him in the right direction. If we channel his energy, if we teach him, if we bless him and put him, elevate him in the right context and teach him what to do with his energy. Think about what that would mean if that energy can be harnessed and used in a positive direction. Yitzchak, the father, sees in Esav the power, the ability to do unbelievable positive things. He's not thrown off by the fact that Esav is wayward and lost and headed off in a million different directions. So what, says Yitzchak, all he needs is a blessing. All he needs is some good education to take him and teach him how to use this gift, this energy that Hashem has given him. I'll tell you a story. The first Rebbe of Chabad They caught in Chabad, they called him the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe had a chassid, a follower. And the chassid came to the Alter Rebbe one day and said, Rebbe, my son has gone off the beaten path of Judaism. He's off in a million different directions. The Rebbe says, I'd like to see your son. Tell him I'd like to talk to him. The guy goes, Rebbe, my son has lost interest in everything. I don't think he's going to come and see you. The Rebbe said, ask him, maybe he'll come. All right, the father convinces his son, the Rebbe wants to see you. The son agrees. Somehow, he goes to the Alter Rebbe, and he tells, as soon as he walks in, he tells the Alter Rebbe, I'm not interested in you. I'm not interested in your Torah. I'm not interested, leave me alone. I won't bother you, and you don't bother me. The Alter Rebbe says, what are you interested in? He says, what am I interested in? Not the same things you're interested in. All right, the Rebbe says, tell me what you're interested in. He says, I'm interested in horses. Pferden in Yiddish. Horses. What's so exciting about horses? Oh, he tells the Rebbe, we have horse races, and we make money, and we train them, and it's tutzach, it's lebedik, horse racing, it's the new thing. And we catch them, and we train them, and we check them, and we this and that. And he gets all excited about how horse racing works. Anyways, he's explaining to the Rebbe, and he's listening and listening and listening. And the Rebbe says to him, tell me, what's better, a fast horse or a slow horse? He goes, Rabbi, you're supposed to be an intelligent man. That's a really dumb question. What's better, a fast horse or a slow horse? Of course, a fast horse. A fast horse wins the race. A slow horse loses the race. His Rebbe goes, yeah, but I think a slow horse is better. You know why? Because horses always go off course. At some point, a horse will go off course. And then it'll get lost. And the slower the horse, the less distance it'll go when it's going off the beaten path. I think we should invest in slow horses because when they get lost, they don't get that lost. They don't go too far. They just kind of veer off the path a little bit. But then you can pull them back straight away. Fast horses, in 2 seconds, they're God knows where, and then you can never find them. And then all your investment is gone because the fast horse takes off in the wrong direction. And it's all over. And the young man tells the Rebbe, you're right. When they get lost, fast horses get lost much faster, much further, much quicker. But he tells the Rebbe, a fast horse is still better. You know why? Because when the fast horse realizes that it's gone off course and it decides to go back on course, it can get back to that course with that same speed that the fast horse has. So even for those days when the horse goes off course, the fast horse is still better because it can go back on course faster. Yes, said the Alter Rebbe, open your ears and listen to what your mouth is saying. God has created in this world fast horses and slow horses, fast people and slow people. There are people with intensity and energy. There are people with fire who are alive, and they can accomplish tremendous, tremendous things in this world. Sometimes we call them mishagoyim. And then there are people who are normal, typically calmer, more docile types of individuals. Says the Alter Rebbe, I want you to know that people who have more energy, people who are the faster horses, when they fablungen, when they get lost much further, much faster, because all of that energy that the person has, if it, God forbid, goes in the wrong direction, it takes off and takes on a life of its own, and the horse can end up God knows where in record timing. But when machaptzach, as soon as you realize that you're off course, you can take all of that energy, you can put it in the right direction, and off you go. I believe the greatest gift of an educator, the greatest ability of a person who is involved in chinuch, is to be able to see this very point. is to look at a child who sometimes cannot sit straight, cannot sit in their chair, cannot follow instructions, cannot do whatever it is that sometimes so many other kids or students find so easy, and to look at this child and say, this individual possesses a potential that nobody else has. Yes, the kid gets up to trouble, and yes, the kid does this and that. Don't be fooled. Not a bad kid. Has energy. Once upon a time, they used to call this Spielkes, right? Spielkes. Today they call it ADD. Spielkes. But people who have Spielkes, people who have pins and needles, people who have energy, they can make a difference. They can change the world. They can do things with it. They need to be taught how. But they have the power to do it. And so Yitzchak looks at his two children, Yaakov and Esav, and says, Yaakov is wonderful. Of course, Yaakov is wonderful. He toes the line. He wakes up in the morning. He says, Moida Ani. He gets his Negel Wasser. He studies Torah all day. He's a source of nachas. Mwah! Beautiful. But Esav's got power. Esav's got a fire. He can, if we need to change the world, if we need to make an impact that will last thousands of years, we need the energy of Esav. Perhaps what was at stake here was no less than the question of who's going to father the Jewish nation. Yitzchak said, the Jewish people are going to go through 3,500 years. They're going to face unspeakable obstacles. They need the energy that Esav has. They need that kind of backbone that Esav has. They need his ability to stand up to opposition and fight when they have to, for the sake of their own survival. Yaakov, Yitzchak, his father, feared is too docile, too weak. How is he going to stand up for himself and fight when he has to? We cannot take this risk. Vayehav Yitzchak es Esav. Yitzchak was in love with Esav, not the idol-worshipping Esav, not the murderous Esav, not the rapist Esav. That wasn't the Esav that Yitzchak loved. Yitzchak loved the potential. He wanted the Esav he was going to create when he blessed him. The Esav he was going to create when he blessed him was going to be an educated, channeled Esav who would take all that potential and know what to do with it. That was Yitzchak's plan. Yitzchak's plan was matched and surpassed only by the wisdom of his own wife, Rivka. Rivka had a much deeper insight than Yitzchak did. Rivka, Yitzchak's wife, saw something in Yaakov that Yitzchak didn't see. Rivka, Yitzchak's wife, the mother of these two boys, saw something in their son Yaakov, the quiet yeshiva bacher, sitting and studying Torah. She saw something in Yaakov that even her husband Yitzchak didn't see. And one fine day, she decided to show her husband exactly who their son Yaakov was. One fine day, she decided to show her husband the world and to record it in the Torah for all eternity, exactly who Yaakov was. So you know what she did? She dressed her son Yaakov in Esav's clothing. She gave him the food, and she told him to act as an imposter. She told him to go into Yaakov's room and pretend to be someone else. And he does. And he comes into Yitzchak's room, and he's wearing Esav's clothing, and he says, Anochi Esav b'charecha, I am Esav, your firstborn son. And Yitzchak's head starts to spin. Did Yitzchak know who was standing before him? I dare say, of course he did. Of course he did. HaKoil Koil Yaakov, you can't change your voice. You can't change your voice. So the voice, the word, even the words that this man is using, everything is Yaakov. So what's the part that's throwing him off? Well, the part that's throwing him off is that he's now wearing Esav's garments. And it was Rivka's way of telling her husband, you don't know who Yaakov is. You don't know his strength. You don't know his ability. You don't know what this guy possesses. You don't know the energy and the strength that Yaakov has because he sits in yeshiva all day and learns and you don't get an opportunity to see it. But when the situation calls for it, and Yaakov needs to put on the garments of Esav, Yaakov needs to defend himself like an Esav. Yaakov needs to wear the garments, interact with the field, interact with the world like an Esav. When the time will come and Yaakov will need to do that, Yaakov will rise to the challenge. And he will. Here Rivka says, here's the proof. And she physically, literally, dresses Yaakov in Esav's garments. And so Yaakov walks in there. And Yitzchak sees for the first time that everything he sees in Esav, that strength and that potential and that ability and that grit and gut necessary, actually Yaakov possesses it all. In truth, Yaakov could act when necessary, could put on the garments of Esav and do what it is that he have that kind of strength as well. And it's at that point that Yitzchak blesses his son Yaakov, because he can see that his wife is right. And Yaakov does really have that potential as well. What does this mean? I want to explain it in a little bit of a deeper, and explain it a little bit better. A Yid, a Yaakov, the Jewish people, in the end, all came from Yaakov Avinu. A Jew needs to have two hats that they wear. A Jew needs to be able to function on two levels. A Jew needs to be able to go into shul, to go into a beis medrash, to go into yeshiva and study Torah like a Yaakov. A Jew needs to be able to connect to Hashem, to be spiritual, to live a spiritual life like a Yaakov does. But that same Jew sometimes needs to put on the garments of Esav. But that same Jew sometimes needs to understand that even a Yaakov was put into this world by Hashem, because at some point you have to walk out of the shul, and at some point you have to walk out of the yeshiva, and at sometimes you have to walk out of the Beis HaKnesses. You have to go into the world, and the world is full of real Esavs. And over there in that world of real Esavs, you need to stand up and fight for your identity as a Jew and protect it. And you need to show the world, as Yaakov himself does, when he faces all of his challenges, that if necessary, I will defend myself as a Jew with any and all means necessary. I have the strength, I have the tools, and I have the readiness. I'm no docile sheep. I'm no innocent lamb. I'm no naive child. If I need to put on the garments of Esav, yes, I will do that. And I will do it with pride, and I will do it with success. If that's the case, says Yitzchak, even as he maintains his innocence and his identity as a Yaakov, as a Yid, he can still act like an Esav when necessary. If that's the case, I'm going to bless him. One more point. Perhaps, at least on a spiritual level, this is what we mean when this is what it means when the Torah tells us that Yaakov purchased the rights of the firstborn from his brother Esav. What in heaven's name does that mean? How do you purchase the rights of the firstborn from your brother Esav? What does that mean? On a spiritual level, perhaps what it means is that Yaakov as a tzaddik, Yaakov as a Yid, Yaakov as a spiritually connected and deeply godly human being, adapts the tools of Esav for when they're necessary. He takes them, he purchases them from the world. He looks around the world at the Esavs in the world around him and says, I may need those tools, I may need that energy, I may need that I may need that aggression at times. And so he purchases it, meaning he brings it into his own domain so that he can use it when necessary. When it's necessary to defend another Jew, when it's necessary to stand up and take a leadership position, when it's necessary to do what needs to be done, when it's necessary to tell the world that as a Jew I am proud and I'm here to stay whether you like it or not. Yaakov is ready to put on the garments of Esav. And at that point, Yitzchak blesses him and all of his descendants with all the brachas that they would need in order to get through all of Jewish history. When it was all over, Yitzchak hears that in fact this is what happened. Yaakov had purchased the firstborn rights from his brother Esav. And Yitzchak says, of course, Gam Baruch Yihye. In that case, let all the blessings be his and let him enjoy them. Let him use them for many years to come. You see, it isn't necessary. It isn't necessary for Yaakov to be seen as someone weak. Yaakov can have all the power that Esav has when necessary. I conclude with the following point. Perhaps there's another angle to this. Perhaps there's one more element to this. There are also different stages in Jewish history. There are times when Jews looked like Yaakov's, and there are times when, may Hashem protect us, when Jews look and act like Esav's. There are times in Jewish history where Jews know their own identity. They carry themselves like a Yaakov. And there are times in Jewish history where the Jews put on the garments of Esav and want and do their best to assimilate. They just want to be like the Jones across the street. And so Yitzchak blesses a Yaakov who is both a Yaakov and in the garments of Esav. Perhaps it was Yitzchak's way of blessing all the Jewish people for all eternity, for all future times. Whether they sound like Yaakov or whether they sound like Esav. Whether they look like Yaakov or whether they look like Esav. Whether they identify themselves as Yaakov or Esav. The bracha was given to a Yaakov who said, Anoichi Esav b'chayrecha, who identifies himself as an Esav, meaning every Jew, a descendant of Yaakov, would always have these brachas accompanied with him. In a spiritual sense, when Yaakov said, in a spiritual sense, when Yaakov said, I am Esav, Anoichi Esav b'chayrecha, perhaps what he really meant was to tell his father, all that energy and all that potential that you see in Esav, I have it too. I've Anoichi Esav b'chayrecha, your b'chor, your firstborn, your most powerful son. I, as a Yaakov, possess that as well. And in that vein and in that light, Yitzchak is able to bless his son Yaakov for all times to come. I believe what the Torah is teaching here, what of the many things the Torah is teaching us here is this. Number one, when you see a child that's an Esav, always look for their potential. Things may not be as simple as they seem. This child may grow up. This individual may one day have the opportunity to do things that nobody else can do with this power that Hashem has given them. And then the Torah is teaching us that even as we are Yaakovs, even as we try to live as spiritually connected and holy Jews, we always have to remember that every now and then we have to put on the garments of Esav. We have to go out there into the world, in a reality which is not friendly and which is not kind and at times which is filled with persecution. And be ready to defend and be ready to stand up and be ready to show Jewish pride and to say, if necessary, Yaakov will wear the garments of Esav and tell the world, don't mess with me because I will destroy you. Don't see me as weak. Don't think I'm incapable. If necessary, I will out Esav, I will out trick and outsmart the greatest Esavs of the world, because we have Hashem on our side. We can do whatever it is that it takes. We can do whatever it is that Hashem wants us to do. Look like a Yaakov, look like an Esav. We're not afraid. And the moment Yitzchak saw that his son Yaakov was not fearful and not docile, it was at that moment that Yaakov sealed his fate as the true carrier of the brachas and the true ancestor of all the Jewish people. May Hashem bless us all with a good Shabbos and a good week and Nor of Simchas.